And your life.
Good afternoon, and I hope everyone is staying well. I'm Ed Feinstein, Rabbi of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California, and today we are beginning a Lunch and Learn online, which is a brand new experience. I am a boomer troglodyte to this technology. That's why we're a little bit late, but glad that you stuck around, and we're going to be learning together for a little bit less than an hour, and we'll do this on Wednesday afternoons. Now, for those who are my regular Lunch and Learn groups, we've been doing early prophets and talking about the story of King David, but I'm going to ask your indulgence, and I apologize for this. I promise you, when the virus crisis is over, we will return to that and finish the story of King David, the story of Solomon, and the other kings and prophets of Israel. But because so many new people are going to be joining us, we're going to be starting all over again, and I apologize for those who've been with me. Pesach is coming, and I think it would be valuable to learn the book of Exodus. So if you have a Bible, please open to the beginning of Shmot, the beginning of the book of Exodus, the second book of the Hebrew Bible. If you don't have a Bible, go steal one from a local synagogue. I don't believe they're going to be using them for quite a while. You can also get it online in a number of different areas and places. I suggest the JPS translation was created in the 1970s by a group of scholars who took latest research in Hebrew philology and archaeology. But basically, for our purposes, pretty much any Bible, any Jewish Bible or any Bible will do. And we're going to be learning the first chapters of the book of Exodus in preparation for Pesach. My hunch is going to be that we're going to be stuck at home for Pesach, and many of us are not going to have access to large families or communities, but we'll be doing this together as small families and small groups. And so learning the text, I think, would be really helpful for your Seder. So if you'll start with me in the book of Exodus today, because I know not everybody has a Bible or a Torah, I'll read the text for you. But next Wednesday at 12:30, see if you can scare up a Chumash. The book begins with a retrospective going back. It begins with the words Ve'elish Shemot. Now, every book of the Bible receives its name in a very arbitrary way. The name of the book is simply the first significant word in the text. So the first book of the Bible is called Breshit, and the second one Shmot, and the third one Vayikra, and then Bamidbar, and then Devarim. These are the first. It's just the first word in the beginning of the text. So Breshit is the first word of the Torah. Shmot is the second word, but it's the first significant word. But what's ironic is the way in which the name of the book captures the true essence of the book. So the first book of the Torah, Breshit, which means in the beginning or in the beginning of, is a story of beginnings. It's the beginning of the world. It's the beginning of humanity. It's the beginning of the Jewish people. It's the launching of the Jewish project in the world. And more than just simple chronological beginning, the book of Breshit is the story of our foundational notions. What are the foundational philosophical convictions that will guide the entire book? And when we finish the book of Shmot, when we finish the book of Breshit, we finish the book of Genesis, we're exposed to a philosophy of history that is going to carry us through the entirety of the book. And that philosophy of history, is going to be that God is running history, and we human beings are actually not quite actors, but more bystanders in the creation of the events that shape life. That's the story at the end of the book. It's Joseph says to his brothers, don't be afraid that you sent me here. You didn't kidnap me, or you intended evil, but God turned it into good. This is actually what we intended, what God intended. That philosophy of history, which will end the book of Breshit, end the book of Genesis, begins the book of Shmot, begins the book of Exodus. And without that philosophy of history, you can't really understand the Bible's point of view, because that is the entirety of the Bible's idea. History is a text. History can be read as a statement of divine of godly intentions in the world. Now, that's the Bible's conviction. By the time the Jewish people gets to the Talmud, they're going to have to reconsider this, because there'll be catastrophes that will befall the Talmudic age, and that will make it impossible for Jews to maintain that history is a text for God. History is a text of God's involvement in human life, and the rabbis are going to have to adjust that. And of course, when we get to it becomes even harder. It's going to become almost impossible to maintain that. And that's where we sit today. How on earth do you maintain that sort of philosophy, that history is a window into God's intentions in the world, when you have experienced something as horrific as the Holocaust? So I'm going to submit to you that it's very difficult to sit down at a Pesach Seder without having these issues pushed right up in our faces. And that becomes so very, very difficult. Let's go back to the book of Shmot. Ve'elu Shmot b'nei Yisrael. So we said Breshit is the foundational book. Shmot, the word Shmot, means names. And it begins with, you'll see here, a list of names. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, Binyamin, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. These are the names. This is a recollection of where we came from in Genesis and the beginning of the story of Exodus. But the entire book reflects that word, names. This is a book about identity. This is a book about essence, about who we are and what calls us and how we are called in the world. The book is going to give us the two principal events that will identify the Jewish people: the Exodus from Egypt and the revelation of God on Mount Sinai. These two events make us Jewish. Now, stop for just a moment and consider this notion of identity. What makes me me? What makes you you? How do you identify yourself in the world? Two fellas meet at a cocktail party, and after they say, "What's your name?" then the next question is, "Well, what do you do?" And typically in American life, masculine American life, men identify themselves by their occupation. If you say, "I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a rabbi, I'm a professor," try an experiment one day. Go to a cocktail party and tell people that you're a nursery school teacher or a teacher's aide in third grade and see how you get treated. Identity for American men, at least in post-war culture, has been my occupation, my economic status, my place in the economic grid. And for women, more and more, that's the way that we identify ourselves. It's not that I work as a rabbi or I work as a lawyer. I am a lawyer. I am a doctor. I am a professor. This is my sense of identity. What else identifies us? Because we have multiple identities. We have layered identities. I love a certain kind of music. I love opera or country western music. I'm a vegetarian or a vegan or a pescatarian. I belong to a synagogue. I belong to a bowling league. I belong to Kaiser Permanente. My friend Ron Wolfson, wonderful professor of Jewish education and my neighbor and friend, would often say, if you take out your wallet and dump out all the little cards in your wallet, you'll discover at least how you carry your identity. I'm a citizen of the state of California. I'm a member of Blockbuster Video. I have an account at Chase Bank. These are identities. In the beginning of his book, Sapiens, Yuval Harari points out that that chimpanzees form tribes. But because chimpanzees can only communicate face to face, the total size of a chimpanzee pod is 19 chimpanzees, because that's the number of relationships that face-to-face relationships can carry. Can only have 19 relationships face-to-face. But we human beings, we create identities in much broader senses because we have something that chimpanzees don't have. We have narrative. And narrative gives us a sense of stories that identify us. So what are the stories that identify us? There are certainly personal stories. There are certainly communal stories. There are familial stories, family stories. There are these multiple layers of identity. I'll confess to you something which no rabbi is allowed to confess, but in these days of plague, we might as well be honest with each other. I've never quite figured out Jewish identity. I've never quite figured it out. Honest to God, as a rabbi and a religious Jew, I have a certain sense of what Jewish means. But for me, it's very different than what it means for members of the community and people I meet all the time. I mean, people who seem to have no outward behavior that reflects an inward sense of Jewishness, and yet will confess to me that they have a powerful sense of inward Jewishness. Or people for whose inward Jewishness sort of flowers at moments of crisis, moments of simcha, moments of happiness, and sometimes the strangest of moments. I'll give you just one small, strange example. As a young man that I met when I was a rabbi in Texas, he came to me because he wanted to convert to Judaism. And he had a wonderful, wonderful, sweet man with a Latino name, and talked to me about the Latino family. His family was Mexican and had come from the north of Mexico into San Antonio. He grew up in San Antonio, attended university in Texas, and had always felt that he was connected in some way to the Jewish people. He was absolutely Catholic, went to Catholic schools as a kid, and ended up going to Baylor University, which is a Baptist university. But he says he always had an inner Jewishness. So we worked with this young man. We befriended him. Nina and I became very close to him, and I taught him Torah. And before his conversion, he went home to his family in San Antonio to talk to his parents. He wanted to be whole when he became a Jew, and he wanted to confess to his parents that this was his path. So he sat with his parents, and his parents did not react the way he expected them to. He was afraid that they were going to be very angry, because in the Catholic Church, to step out of the ecclesia, out of the sacred community, is to lose the benefits of salvation. And he was terrified that his mother would tell him that he would be going to hell and she would never see him. And she didn't do that. She only told him to go in and see his abuela, his elderly grandmother. So he went to go see his abuela, and he confessed to his abuela that he's about to become a Jew, Hebreo, and that he was studying the Bible with a rabbino, and he was about to join the synagogue community. And his abuela gave him a very crooked, wistful smile, and she's pointed under the bed. And under the bed, there was a wooden box. And she said, "This is for you, if this is the path you've chosen." And he opened the wooden box, and he found a glass chalice, a glass cup, a Kiddush cup. And he turned it over on the bottom. She pointed. She said, "Turn it over on the bottom." And on the base, on the bottom, was a six-pointed Jewish star. She said, "This has been in our family for 500 years, and this now belongs to you." Now, how on earth does Jewishness or some resonance with things Jewish get passed in this way? It's what in Yiddish you call a pintel yid, a point of Jewishness. What is Jewish identity? What does it mean? I'm going to suggest to you that the first chapter of Exodus asks that question in a very earnest way. Now, let's stop for a moment and talk methodologically. There are traditional Jews who believe that the Bible was handed to Moses on Mount Sinai. I don't believe that that's the way. I do believe there's something wholly transcendent and divine in this book. But I would like to suggest that the way that you read the Bible is to ask yourself a very pointed question. Who told this story? When did they tell it? And why? Who told this story and why? There were moments in Jewish history when it became very important to ask the question, what does it mean today to be a Jew? What is the Jewish project? What is the mission of our people in the world? What identifies us? In what ways are we distinct from the communities among whom we live? In what ways are we connected to those communities? Who are we? One can imagine, for example, that that when the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and a community of Jews from Jerusalem are exiled, and they sit, as the psalmist says, by the waters of Babylon, and there they weep. They're asking themselves exactly what does it mean to be part of this Jewish community? What does it mean to be a Jew? And in those moments, this story becomes critically important because it's a meditation on what connects us, what holds us together as a community. What are the boundaries of our community? Who belongs and who doesn't belong? Where is there a sense of authenticity in this community's culture and expression? How much are we permitted to take from the outside and bring inward, and how much is ours endemically and not permitted to be polluted, as it were, by something from the outside? So let's take a look inside and ask that question. The book begins by saying, Ve'ele Shmot B'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the sons of Israel. Now, understand what that means. We use the phrase B'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel, as a sort of generic term for Jewish. Israelite is the way it's translated in the Bible. But what the Torah is telling you at the very beginning is that B'nai Yisrael are literally the children of this man, Israel, Jacob. And here it gives us the names. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Yisachar, Zvulun, Binyamin, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. These are the names of people. Now, what if I told you a story about my dear Uncle Sam and his 50 children? Arkansas, Alabama, Alaska, Connecticut, Ohio, California. You would understand the game. For Israelites of the First Temple period, these were the names of tribes. And what's being told here is that before we were tribes, we were family. That the deepest connection of Jews with each other is a blood family, a blood relation. It's called an ethnos, an ethnicity. We are related to each other. We are family. I mean, think about this in our own experience. I was a kid when the Soviet Jewry movement was going on. Talked about it a few weeks ago in Shul. When the entire American Jewish community mobilized to liberate Jews who were trapped in the Soviet Union by the repressive policies of that government. Who are they to me? What's my responsibility to them? And then when Operation Solomon began and the state of Israel began flying Ethiopian Jews out of Ethiopia and bringing them to Israel. And I remember visiting Israel and meeting these people in the Merkaz Klita and the immigration center, and then seeing them over the years as they've become part of Israeli society, sitting on a bus next to a beautiful Israeli soldier who happened to be 6'5" and black, African. And he sits down next to me and says, Slicha, can I sit in the seat? And I say, Vakasha. And when he leaves the bus, he wishes me Shabbat Shalom. It's a beautiful thing. He's my family. He doesn't look like my family, but that's the point. My family is broader than the circle of immediate relations, and yet there's some deep, deep sense of family loyalty. Was it Robert Frost who said, home is where they have to take you in no matter what? And family is we're connected to each other no matter what. And when there's a catastrophe in some corner of the world to Jews, the rest of us feel it. We are attached to each other in a familial, in a blood relational way. And that's what the Torah is beginning with. Now, what's the advantage and what's the disadvantage of defining Jewish identity as ethnos, as blood relation, as family? The advantage is we know who belongs and who doesn't belong. The advantage is this deep sense of connection and caring. The disadvantage is that you can't join a family. You can't join a family. When I married my wife, I was a son-in-law, and I love my in-laws, and they love me, and they welcome me into their family. I mean, I've known them for many years because my wife and I knew each other for a long time before we got married. But they welcome me to their family with warmth and with love. But I would always be a little bit on the outside of the family. I wasn't quite in because I didn't know the stories, because I wasn't there on the camping trip to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, when the event with the camper van happened. And I sat with my shoes on my feet, sitting up straight on the living room couch. And I said to my father-in-law, Mr. Bieber, sir, would it be okay if I got a glass of milk from the refrigerator? And poor Herb looked at me and said, stop calling me sir. Take off your shoes and put them on the couch and get your own goddamn glass of milk. He was trying to tell me that I'm not a son-in-law anymore. I belong to the family. But that's what happens when you join. You see, you're always an in-law. There's sort of a one level of separation. Can anyone join the Jewish people without being put into this position of one step outside? That's going to be a critical question for the entirety of Jewish history. I mean, even today, people who converted to Judaism will tell me that their in-laws, their family members, don't accept them completely. They don't completely trust the sincerity of their conversion because they're an in-law, because this level of blood relation still identifies us, no matter how fervent and passionate we are as Jews. If you're not born into the family, you're not quite right. That's still there, and that has a long history. That idea has a long history. In the book of Ezra, at the very end of the Hebrew Bible, Ezra is going to lead the community that's remaining in Jerusalem, and he's going to tell these fellas that they have to give away their foreign wives, their foreign-born wives. Ezra doesn't believe in conversion. The rabbis believed in conversion, but there was a machloket, an argument even among the Talmudic rabbis. The great example of this ideology was Yehuda Halevi, 11th century Spanish Jewish philosopher, poet, writer, and physician. Halevi is going to say that what identifies us Jews is something in our bloodline. We actually, he will say, have a genetic connection to Judaism. And that those who are born outside of our community are never fully accepted in. And that's sort of a tragedy, you know. And that philosophy carries on to this day. You'll find it in various forms in certain voices in the mystical and Hasidic tradition, which believe that the souls of non-Jews are less holy than the souls of Jews. So this ideology that we are a family is the first marker of Jewish identity. And we have to recognize its power, but also its limitations. Let's read the next line. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph already being in Egypt. Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so the land was filled with them. You have to know Genesis to know why this is critical. Because the writer of the book of Shemot, the writer of the book of Exodus, knows Genesis and is playing off of Genesis. Now remember, in Genesis, God fills the world with life, and life is prolific, and it's the same Hebrew words. B'nei Yisrael paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu v'ma'od ma'od, so much. The same Hebrew words reflect the sort of spreading out and the prolific nature of Jews. Now, was that real? Or was that the perception of the Egyptians? And that's going to be the beginning of the next drama. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Why is it that when leaders assume positions for the first time, they seem to forget history? Leaders assume power, they assume authority, and it's always like everything that happened before me is either irrelevant or wrong or stained with error, and only I can fix it all. We've heard this many times in history. It's not only the current administration that has this, but many times in history. So you have a new king. According to the archaeologists, the previous generation were the Hittites or the Hyksos, and they were expelled by the native Egyptians. And the new king is of the native Egyptians and was suspicious of those who had made alliances with the previous administrations because they were themselves invaders. He didn't know Joseph, which means I don't know the backstory. He doesn't know how all these Jews ended up in his land. He didn't know what they had ever done for the Egyptians. He had no sense that this indigenous minority population might be a benefit to him instead of a threat. And he was afraid. What we're going to see next is an image of political power that is infected with the virus of fear. And fear is a very powerful disease because it will destroy good sense. It will destroy long-term thinking. It will destroy ethics. When we are afraid, we hold up, we bind ourselves and bond ourselves and push away the outside world. The most powerful effect of fear upon a political community is an ideology of binary thinking. There's us and there's them. There's our people and there's those people. There's the children of light and there's the children of the damned. They're citizens and they're aliens. They're those who belong and they're those that we must not allow to belong. They are an invasion. They are an infection. They are a malady. And they have to be expelled in order to protect the purity of ours and what's important to us, in order to protect the culture, in order to protect the power, in order to protect the uniqueness of our own. That's what fear does. And the Bible is going to show us a remarkable example. And it's going to play out in our own bodies as we become slaves of what happens when binary thinking, us and them, grips a land and grips a people. Here is the king of Egypt. He is the most powerful man in the world. He controls continents. He manages nations. His economy is the biggest and most fruitful and powerful in the world. And he is a slave to his fear. Look, he says, Hava nidchak malo. The people Israel are too numerous for us. How numerous were they? I mean, seriously. They lived in Goshen. They were shepherds. The Bible says they expanded, but they expanded relative to the group that they began with. But relative to the Egyptian population, were they really that much? Or was this simply his subjective impression? Or worse, was this a political ploy? Was he using the presence of an indigenous minority population that was alien, that was foreign, that was culturally different than the Egyptians? Was he using this to solidify his power, solidify his hold on the Egyptian administration, solidify his position on the top of Egyptian politics by using them as a scapegoat? By pointing to this indigenous alien population, saying, fear them, and using them as a punching bag in order to embrace him, in order to enhance his own power. Look, hine is Hebrews, behold, look, see, this Israelite people. And what's ironic, of course, is that this is the first time in history anyone called us a people. Am b'nei Yisrael. In his eyes, we're a people. Who are we in our own eyes? It's not quite sure right now, by the way. What it meant to call yourself a Jew here, not quite sure. But he sees us as a people. Am b'nei Yisrael, Rav ve'atzum mimenu. They're too great and too powerful for us. Hava nitchak malo, which literally means, let's be wise about this. Which is ironic, because everything he's going to do is the exact opposite of what he should have done. Hava nitchak malo, pen yirbeh, lest they grow even more numerous, increase. And in the event of war, ki tikrena milchama v'nosaf gam hu al sonenu, they will join our enemies and fight against us. ve'ala min haaretz, and rise up from the ground. And the sense is that this people is so great and so powerful that Egypt is threatened by their very presence. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? What do you do? You have too many Jews. How do you deal with that? Well, there's going to be 3 attempts at genocide. Attempt number 1. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. Attempt number 1 is with slavery. They built garrison cities. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, vayifrots, which means to spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread them. Now, spreading out is an interesting idea when you think about this, because you'd imagine that the Israelites would stay concentrated. But if they're going to be enslaved, that means they're going to be working all over the community. This is one of the things the Nazis were worried about. When the Nazis saw Jews as a threat, one of the things that bothered them so much was that Jews were everywhere. We're in business, we're in academics, we're in theater, we're in literature, we're in the politics, we were in the universities. And what bothered the Nazis most was that you can't tell who they are. You think, what was the first thing that the Nazis did is they made us wear yellow patches, yellow stars, so they could tell us apart. Because otherwise, Germans, German Jews, you can't tell them apart. They've been living in Germany for quite a while. Became completely mixed in with the local population. Everybody had a Jewish brother-in-law, Jewish sister-in-law, a Jewish niece or nephew. Can't tell who they are. Haman, when he goes to Achashverosh, is going to make the exact same claim. There is a certain people, said Haman, living among us. Can't tell who they are. They're a threat, but you can't identify them. Sort of like a coronavirus. Can't tell where they're coming from. Don't know who's a carrier. Don't know that you're spreading it. That makes it more dangerous. This is the strange paradox of anti-Semitism, of Jew hatred, that at the same time that you attribute to Jews evil, you fear them because they look just like you, because they're so much like us, because they're in among us. How do you tell who they are? How do you tell who they are? You're actually blaming them for their own assimilation. So you oppress them and you put them into slavery. They ruthlessly imposed upon the Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites labors that made them perform ruthlessly. They made bricks with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and all manner and sorts of tasks in the field. Slavery, attempt number 1 at genocide, doesn't work. You Jews find a way. You find a way to persist. You find a way to remain consistent. You find a way to be resilient, even in the face of this kind of oppression. Rabbi Farkas spoke about this yesterday in his meditation on resilience, which was quite wonderful, and you should go look it up on your VBS screen and listen to it. It's a wonderful conversation. All right, here comes attempt number 2. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look upon the birth stool. If it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let him live. Let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are, it says here, vigorous, but that's a terrible translation. The word is chayot. My bubby used to call me a wilde chaya. They're beasts. They're beasts, Pharaoh. Before the midwife can come to them, they've given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied, increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Attempt number 2 at genocide is a limited genocide to be carried out by the midwives. And the idea is that they should throw the boys into the Nile and let the girls live. Now, if you're trying to limit a population, it should be the other way around. You should kill the girls, not the boys. I mean, just do the math. But he's really afraid of an army. And so he's going to try to kill all the boys. And he goes to the midwives. Now, here is a simple question of Jewish grammar. The Hebrew is Amildot Ivriot, which can mean two different things. It can be in construct form, which means the midwives of the Hebrews, which would indicate that these are Egyptian women who were being recruited by Pharaoh, their king, in order to commit limited genocide against this alien population. Or it can be an adjectival phrase. The Hebrew midwives are themselves Hebrews, in which case Pharaoh is calling upon them to carry out genocide against their own people. Now, either reading is legitimate grammatically. Either reading. Rashi and the traditional Mefarshim, the traditional biblical interpreters, prefer the second one. They want to know that the midwives are Hebrew, and for a very simple reason, because they're going to do something ethical. And the Mefarshim, the traditional Jewish readers of this story, want to divide the good from the bad, the good guys from the bad guys. And so they want to make all the good guys Jewish and all the bad guys Egyptian. And so they're going to say that these midwives have to be Jewish. In fact, Rashi identifies them as Miriam and Yocheved. That's Moses' sister and mom. I like the other reading, certainly the reading that Rabbi Shulweiss taught me. This is the first case of rescuers, the first case of people who resist a decree of genocide in order to save life. In fact, this is the first case of civil disobedience in the name of justice. I'm told that Brandeis University has an award called the Shiphrah and Puah Award. They gave it to Martin Luther King, and they gave it to all of those who have resisted Nelson Mandela, and Bishop Tutu, all those resisted tyranny in the name of God's justice. Shiphrah and Puah, they're told, go and kill the boys. But they don't do it. And the Bible says, "V'tirena hamildot eta Elohim." They feared God. Now, what does that mean? It's Elohim here, by the way, the name of God that refers to all of creation, not to Adonai, not to the personal God of the Jewish people, but Elohim, the God of nature. What does that mean? Well, where does a midwife learn to be a midwife? Today, you go to doula school. You can get a master's degree in this. But in those days, you learned it from her mother. Who learned it from her mother? Who learned it from her mother? 10,000 years of midwifery, midwife wisdom, knowledge, passed down through these generations. Can you teach a person to kill if for 10,000 years she has been trained and she has been habituated to bringing life into the world, to saving life? One more. Today, delivery room physicians, nurses have an array of technological tools. When our kids were born, we had baby monitors and we had all sorts of wonderful tools. But what did midwives have? They had no technological tools. They had only one tool, their hands. They knew where to press, where to touch, how to soothe a woman who is in the agony and the pain of childbirth, how to touch pressure points to stop hemorrhaging, how to grab and turn the child so that the birth would come out and the baby would be safe, how to adjust and how to fix and how to massage. It's all in the fingers. Think about things you know in your fingers. Have you ever tried to watch yourself tie your shoes? Can't do it. I couldn't tell you where the keys are on a keyboard, but I type pretty quickly because it's in my fingers. There's knowledge in my fingers. Midwives carry life-giving skills in their hands, in their fingers, in their voices, in their touch, in their gentleness. You can't turn that into killing. They respect a God who gives life. They respect the power of life in the world, and they're willing to resist Pharaoh. To resist Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler in the world, in order to bring life into the world. Now, just as a digression for a moment, you're going to notice in the story that all of the lifesavers are women. It's going to be Shiphrah and Puah, It's going to be the birth mother of Moses, his sister, and the adopted mother of Moses. In the same way that in the Megillah, it's Queen Esther who is going to save us. The women are the ones who save life, and all the life takers are men. It's going to be Pharaoh and his guys, and Moses is going to have to decide which side he's going to be on. It's one of the reasons why the literary critic Harold Bloom claimed that this story was written by women, because it portrays women as the heroes of the story, the heroes of life against death, the heroes of freedom against tyranny. Here, a queen, we'll get to the queen in a moment. Here, these women are going to resist Pharaoh in the same way that Vashti and Esther are going to push back against Achashverosh and Haman. They're not afraid because they are motivated by a power greater than the immediate tyranny of the king. But the problem is that the king's killing people in order to carry forward his program. So what should the midwives do? And what the Torah portrays here is quite remarkable. Stop for a moment and think. How do you get rid of an indigenous minority population that's been part of us for generations? Excuse me. Well, think about how Goebbels did it. You have to convince the population that the Jews you live among are a problem and they're not Jewish and they're not human. And you do that with propaganda. The first stage is you identify them, not us, the Jews, the immigrant, the gay people, the black people, the Latino people. Whatever enemy is at hand, the tyrant will first point to that group and say, there's a them there, and we can identify them. And by putting on the yellow star, you actually visually identify them. Then the second thing you do is you castigate them. They're the reason why we lost the war. They're the reason why we're losing our jobs. They're the reason why our moral fiber is dissolving. They're the reason why we are having trouble. And then the third thing you do is, because they're the reason, you have to isolate them. So the Nuremberg laws said Jews can't employ non-Jews. Jews have to leave schools, they have to leave the university, they have to leave businesses, and eventually you build ghettos and you isolate them physically. And then you dehumanize them. And what did Goebbels, the great master of Nazi propaganda, what did Goebbels use to dehumanize us? Two metaphors. The first was a medical metaphor. Jews were a cancer on the body politic. And if you have a cancer, you call in a doctor, a surgeon who cuts out the cancer. And it may hurt you, but it cuts out the cancer. And the other metaphor was vermin. Jews are a vermin in the fatherland. So what do you do when you have vermin? What do you do when you have bugs in your kitchen? You call an exterminator to get rid of the bugs. And that's what Goebbels did. And that's what Pharaoh does. But now the midwives, knowing that that's the propaganda, knowing that what Pharaoh has done was convince the people of Egypt that Israelites, Jews, were not the same, we're not human, they simply repeat back to Pharaoh his own propaganda, standing in court, standing in the public sphere of the court. Pharaoh says, why the hell didn't you obey my order? And the midwives say, Pharaoh, you know, these Hebrew women are not human. They're beasts. They don't have babies. They have litters of babies. And before we arrive, they've already given birth. And Pharaoh can't help but agree with them, whether he believes it or not. He has to agree with them in public because that's the substance of his own propaganda. And in that way, the midwives don't have to do this. In that way, they save us. Now, let me ask you a silly question. The first genocide was through slavery, and that's going to persist. That's the story of the Exodus. And you'll see in a moment there's a more general genocide coming. This was a failed genocide. This attempt to use the midwives is a failed attempt. Why include it in the Bible? Why have the story here? It didn't work. It didn't fix us. It didn't fix Pharaoh's problem. So why put the story here altogether? Besides the fact that these are heroes, we want to tell a hero story, which is a beautiful story. But why In the economy of biblical literature, you don't include stories that don't have any impact on the end of the story. Why include it here? I think you include it for a very important reason. This is what it says at the end. Because the midwives obeyed God, because they feared God, because they had a sense of conscience, because they were motivated by justice. God gave them households. Now, that doesn't mean he gave them new kitchens. A household in the Bible means a dynasty. They have progeny. They have children. Because they saved our children, they had children. Because they saved the generations of the people of Israel, generations came from them. So if you see an Egyptian on the street, you can't scream at him. You can't scream at him and say, "You bastard, your people made me slaves." You can't do that because you might be talking to one of the descendants of Shiphrah and Puah. Our identity as Jews doesn't mean we have an exclusive claim to world morality. There are people in the world who are not of our ethnicity, not of our circle, but rather they maintain a sense of moral identity, which is very close to ours. In fact, the only reason we're in the world is because of their moral identity. This is a warning to us about the dangers of ethical chauvinism, of thinking that we're the only good people in the world. We're the only righteous people in the world. We're not. Not only are we not the only righteous people in the world, the only reason we're in the world is because of Shiphrah and Puah, and because of Oskar Schindler, and Sempo Sugihara, and Juk Westerval, and Raoul Wallenberg. And all through history, there have been those who stepped up to save us at the terrible peril of their own lives. But they stepped up to save us. And we have to remember that. They are moral allies. They are moral partners in the recreation of a world of healing and hope. One last thing. What's the name of the king of Egypt? And you'll say, well, Ramses, but you don't know that yet. You haven't been told that yet. He's Pharaoh, but that's not his name. That's his position. He doesn't have a name yet. He's just the king of Egypt. He's anonymous. And yet two Hebrew midwives, two midwives to the Hebrews, two Egyptian ladies who birth babies, their names are recorded in the Torah. And that's the greatest compliment of all. They are immortal among us because of their heroism. The king, tyranny, that'll come later. Attempt number 1 was slavery. Attempt number 2 was the midwives. Here comes attempt number 3. Then Pharaoh charged his people, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but every girl live. General genocide. Now, how do you deal with that? That we're going to have to wait till next week. And next week, the text will shift from the macro, from the vision of nations, to one house, holding one family, and the birth of one baby, and the kindness of one princess. And together they're going to save the world. Listen, take care of yourselves this week. Follow all the directives. I want to remind you by a couple of things that please look on the VBS website. If you go on the VBS website, look for the button that says VBS at Home for many, many more opportunities to learn with the rabbis, the cantors, our educators, and our friends. Please participate. We welcome everyone to join us and to share Torah and to share kindness and to share friendship during this very, very, very difficult time. I'll remind you again, too, that it's an anxious time. It's an uncertain time. If you want to talk, call Valley Beth Shalom. We rabbis are here to talk. 818-788-6000. Whether you're a member or not, we'd love to have a conversation if we can bring you a little bit of strength and a little bit of resilience and some peace. The VBS Counseling Center has wonderful counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors who are willing to chat with you about your feelings and help you through this very difficult time. That's 818-784-1414. 784-1414. LA Kosher, who is our wonderful caterer, is offering takeout meals. Tonight, my family and I are going to have barbecue chicken. You can get that on the LA Kosher website or also on the VBS website. On Friday night, they have a beautiful Shabbos meal We do curbside pickup. You just drive right by, you put the box. You don't even have to stop. You just slow down to 20 miles an hour, and we'll put a box in your trunk with some wonderful food for Shabbos. And as Pesach gets closer, we'll be talking about how we're going to provision and prepare for Pesach as well. I want to wish everybody a happy and a healthy week. Take care of each other, and we'll see each other soon.
Finish or post or something?
Yeah, it says okay.